Close the door, Dennis said, not looking up from his phone. I knew from the second I stepped into that off-brand beige conference room, with its stained carpet tiles and the faint smell of someone's microwaved salmon lunch, that something was off. Maybe it was the empty chair next to him, the one usually reserved for human resources during these performance reviews. Maybe it was the way he was grinning like he just won a free round of golf instead of prepping to evaluate the person who had single-handedly kept PulseGrid's backend from collapsing into a pile of flaming JavaScript spaghetti. He started flipping open a manila folder like he was unveiling my obituary. This was the same company that could not run payroll on time until I patched their janky legacy system at 2 in the morning from my bathroom floor with food poisoning and a heating pad on my spine. Dennis leaned back, arms behind his head like he was auditioning to be the new face of corporate mediocrity. He looked at me and said, "Justin, let's be honest, you are more of a code monkey than anything else." I blinked. "Excuse me," I said. "You know, head down, keyboard clacking," he replied. "Great at writing code, but not so much at strategic thinking." Oh, I thought that was how this was going to go. He smiled, the kind of smile that usually comes before someone tells you your childhood dog passed away. Except this time the dead thing was my faith in corporate loyalty. "So, we are passing on the raise this year. Budgets are tight, and frankly, we need people who think bigger." That was when something in me stopped. Not like a snap, more like the click of a lock turning. Cold, clean, final. I kept my face completely still, even though inside my blood was boiling like overclocked processor cores in a summer server room. I wanted to ask if Dennis even knew what I did day to day, but I already knew the answer. The man thought Git was short for getting out of here. I built the entire infrastructure they strategized on. "I see," I said finally, hands folded in my lap. He nodded, mistaking my composure for compliance. "I guess that is the problem with people like Dennis. They think silence means submission." What he did not know was that every single inch of the PulseGrid backend, every application programming interface call, every authentication node, every scheduled job, and every microservice ran through code I personally licensed to them. It was a custom software license that, as of the paperwork I made sure legal, rubber-stamped 4 years ago, expired automatically upon the termination of my contract. I had drafted that agreement through my own limited liability company, for liability reasons, or so they thought at the time. I wrote that contract like a prenuptial agreement from hell. Under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, which covers the exclusive rights in copyrighted works, my company retained absolute ownership of the core system. Clause 14b of our agreement clearly stated that the license to use the core backend infrastructure was non-transferable and would expire immediately upon the voluntary or involuntary termination of the agreement. It was signed by all 3 co-founders. Because I knew the universe loves irony, I had highlighted it in yellow, printed a paper copy, and emailed it to myself with a subject line for when they forget who built this house. The betrayal was not loud, it was slow. Drip by drip, they had stopped inviting me to product meetings. They stopped asking what the system could do and started dictating what it must do. Features stacked like unstable blocks. Just a quick update turned into full architecture shifts on 2-day deadlines. And when things worked, Dennis took the credit. When they did not, my inbox got lit up at 3 in the morning with urgent messages begging for a fix. Somewhere along the way, I realized I was not an employee. I was duct tape, the unglamorous, overused, underappreciated miracle holding everything together until the second they thought they could replace me with something flashier. So, I planned. I automated license checks. I set up authentication against a private server I owned. It required 1 heartbeat ping per day to validate backend access. It was silent and invisible, and when that heartbeat stopped, the system would lock like a bank vault. I documented everything in my own words, in my own tools, not out of paranoia, but out of pattern recognition. I had seen this movie before. A developer builds a kingdom, the kingdom forgets the developer, and the kingdom falls. They thought they owned the castle. I just rented it to them month to month with a very clear eviction clause. So when Dennis dropped that code monkey line like he was reading off a meme he barely understood, I did not snap because I was hurt. I did not even flinch because I was mad. I flinched because I knew they were already dead. They just did not know it yet. I turned in my resignation like I was handing over a library book. It was clean, quiet, and overdue in all the right ways. I gave exactly 16 days of notice, written in a gracious tone without a single passive-aggressive syllable. My subject line simply read transition plan. I dated it exactly 16 days before my license's expiration clause hit. That meant the last full day of my employment would land. The day before the backend's heartbeat check failed. The system would keep breathing until midnight of my departure, and then it would flatline. I waited for the explosion. Instead, I got Dennis. He skimmed the email on his phone mid-bite into a breakfast sandwich, yolk dripping onto his chin. "All right," he said, his voice dripping with indifference. "We will start posting your role immediately. It should be easy to get someone offshore to handle this. They are about half the cost, you know." I nodded, keeping my face perfectly neutral while my brain made a short mental list titled Reasons Dennis Will Cry in the Fourth Quarter. It was almost laughable how simple he thought my job was, as if years of custom engineering could be replaced by a simple job posting. He did not ask for a walkthrough, he did not request a handover meeting, and he did not even offer a simple thank you for the years of service I had given to this company. One of our interns, a smart young kid named Toby Miller, peeked over the cubicle wall an hour later. His eyes were wide with panic, and he whispered, "Justin, is it true? Are you really leaving us?" I nodded again, and he looked like someone had told him the office was about to catch fire. "But who is going to fix the automated deployment pipelines?" he stammered. "Who knows the background job schedules? Who understands the fallback database routing rules?" I smiled at him, keeping my voice soft. "Apparently someone offshore for half the cost," I replied. Toby looked down at his keyboard, clearly realizing he was about to inherit a massive structural nightmare. He was just an intern, and they were already setting him up to fail by expecting him to manage a complex production environment without any supervision. I walked back to my desk like a ghost attending his own funeral. I did not touch a single line of code. There was no need to sabotage anything. The contract would do the work for me. Instead, I opened up my monitoring dashboard, ran the final system diagnostics, and downloaded everything. I archived server logs, transaction request histories, load balancer statistics, token refresh rates, and even a snapshot of the cloud infrastructure billing spikes during our last big product launch. I did not need them to run the system, but I wanted receipts. I wanted absolute proof of the kingdom I had built before they tried to tell the board that it was made of straw and held together by luck. I saved it all on a secure encrypted drive, labeled Peach Cobbler Recipes. I did this because Dennis once asked if YAML was a type of vegan spread, and I did not trust him not to go snooping around my desk in a fit of petty panic. The office buzzed with standard Monday apathy. There was no farewell lunch, no card to sign, and not even a simple message in the team chat. That was what stung the most, in a strange way. It was not the insult or the denied raise, but how little it seemed to matter that I was leaving after years of keeping the entire operation running on black coffee, sleepless nights, and pure determination. I could have walked out that door with my laptop engulfed in flames, and no one in upper management would have blinked. But I kept reminding myself that when the lights finally went out, their indifference would turn into absolute terror. I wanted the confusion to brew into real dread. I wanted them to look around the room and ask who used to handle all of this, only to remember the developer they had dismissed as a mere code monkey. On my 10th day of notice, the new team arrived. They were a group of 6 remote developers hired through an agency that looked great on a corporate slideshow. They wore matching company-issued polo shirts on our video introduction call, smiling as if they were about to perform routine maintenance on a simple website instead of entering a digital minefield laced with complex architectural dependencies only I understood. Dennis beamed like a proud father during the call. He clapped his hands together and told the department that this was the new dream team, and it was time to modernize our entire stack. They did not even know which programming language half of our services were written in. On their very first afternoon, they tried to log into the main administration panel. They immediately encountered a credential mismatch error because they had not set up the required local security certificates. They tried again and got locked out of the system. Toby Miller flagged it for them, which triggered a notification to operations. Operations reached out to legal, and legal tried to find me, but I was busy packing up my personal belongings. By my final day, the new team had attempted a full database migration. They did not run a backup protocol or perform a dry run. It was pure chaos. They spun up a new cloud environment and tried to copy the backend code from the public repository, only to realize the repository had not been updated in months. They did not understand that the live production code was continuously deployed from my own private server. I packed my keyboard, zipped my bag, and walked out the door without looking back. My 16 days were up. The validation ping fired off at midnight, just as it had every single night for the past 1,350 days. My private server reached out and quietly asked the same question it always did. Is this contract still active? This time, for the first time, it received a single cold response back. No. There were no flashing red lights, no loud alarms, just a silent flick of a digital switch in the cloud. The back-end services continued to run for a few minutes, operating on sheer cache memory. Then, the inevitable collapse began. At exactly 12:06 in the morning, the main load balancer stopped routing incoming traffic to the authentication service. At 12:09, the user dashboards failed to load. By 12:15, every single customer-facing portal timed out with a gateway error. By 12:22, the support ticket system, which relied entirely on the back-end to track issues, crashed and died. The system had flatlined. The next morning, the PulseGrid office woke up to the smell of smoldering systems. The support department was immediately hit with an explosion of hundreds of angry customer emails. Every single failed login attempt and every broken transaction was another drop in a massive storm that the company was completely unprepared to handle. When the team tried to find Dennis Croft, he was nowhere to be seen. He had decided to take a personal day to reset after navigating the stress of team transitions. He had left a team of offshore developers and one terrified intern holding a bag full of angry customers. They were trying to restore services using old configurations, but every attempt was met with connection errors and server failures. Meanwhile, our newly hired chief technology officer, a buzzword enthusiast named Chloe Thorne, stood in front of a dry erase board trying to run a root cause analysis. I think the main issue is a missing environment variable in our configuration, she announced, taking a sip from her custom mug. Toby Miller, who had spent the night watching the logs scroll by like a horror movie, raised his hand. It is not an environment variable, he whispered, looking exhausted. The entire codebase is rejecting our servers. It is a license issue. The software belongs to Justin's LLC, and the license just expired. Chloe Thorne blinked in confusion. Who leases back-end architecture, she asked. Toby sighed and pulled up the contract on his laptop. Apparently we do, he replied. They had assumed all code written by contractors automatically belonged to the firm, without ever reading the specific agreements. The panic started to set in. At 11:15 in the morning, the first major investor email arrived with a subject line indicating an urgent platform outage. By 12:20 in the afternoon, their biggest corporate client threatened to terminate their agreement if service was not restored by the end of the day. At 1:30 in the afternoon, an emergency video conference was scheduled. Most of the staff had to join from their mobile phones because the internal corporate network was too congested with error traffic to support video. Dennis Croft finally popped up in the group chat. Someone needs to call Justin Vance, he wrote. They did not even know what they were asking for. But I did. While they were running around trying to spin a disaster into a positive development, I was sitting on my back porch in comfortable sweatpants. I was drinking iced coffee and watching a couple of squirrels fight over a stray chip in the yard. I had already seen the notifications on my phone. 3 recruiters from competing firms had reached out, and 2 other competitors had sent direct messages. I even got a note from an old coworker named Clara, who wrote that she had heard about the massive system outage and asked if I was available for freelance work. I did not reply to any of them. Instead, I opened my private monitoring system and watched the red error bars jump across the screen. It was not personal revenge, it was simple arithmetic. I built the code, I owned the rights, they let me walk, and now the system was gone. The 3 o'clock all-hands meeting was less of a status update and more of a funeral. 85 faces stared blankly at their webcams as the chief technology officer stumbled through a presentation slide deck. Chloe Thorne clicked through a complicated flowchart that looked like a conspiracy theory wall. As you can see, our services are experiencing a temporary routing issue in the legacy database layer, she explained. Toby Miller unmuted his microphone. That is not what is happening, he interrupted. Chloe paused. What do you mean, she asked. It is not legacy, Toby said. It is Justin's system. He did not break it. It just shut down because the contract expired. I found the clause in his original agreement. A long, heavy silence fell over the call. A vice president in a fleece vest finally spoke up, his face turning pale. Wait, we do not actually own our own backend? Toby shook his head. No, we rented it from his LLC. The license was non-transferable, and it expired the moment his contract ended. Somewhere in the background, a junior lawyer muttered an expletive. That was the moment everything went into overdrive. The legal team immediately started digging through the archived email chains. The human resources director tried to deny any knowledge of the licensing agreement until someone forwarded the original signed PDF. The contract clearly had the license clause highlighted, and next to it, a retired compliance officer had written, "Looks fine in the margins." The finance director muttered that they might have to restate their earnings if the platform's continuity could not be guaranteed immediately. A partner with a wireless earpiece warned the executives that they were in breached contract territory and that they needed to resolve this before litigation started. They realized that if their main clients sued them for downtime, the company would go bankrupt before the end of the fiscal year. I was sitting on my balcony, watching a couple of birds fight over a piece of bread on the sidewalk. My phone started buzzing every few minutes. LinkedIn messages from various recruiters were piling up. One of them was from a recruiter named Vivian, who wrote that she had heard about the Pulse Grid outage and asked if I was open to a more stable role. She mentioned a chief technology officer position at another firm with a base salary of $280,000, plus options and a signing bonus. I also got a message from my old friend Clara, who told me that Dennis Croft had just posted a vague update about taking responsibility and reflecting on his leadership on LinkedIn, and that he had turned off all comments. I laughed and took a sip of my cold brew coffee. Back in the corporate call, Dennis Croft had finally logged on. His hair was messy, and his voice sounded strained under the pressure. Yes, we are reviewing the situation, he stammered. Our legal team is involved, and we are hoping to reconnect with Justin Vance soon to work something out. Someone asked why they had not backed up the databases. Dennis shrugged. We thought we owned the entire backend, he said. He never mentioned the license to us. I laughed out loud when I heard that. I had mentioned it multiple times in writing, but they had simply ignored my emails. They thought my silence meant I was ignorant of my own worth. They did not realize that I was quiet, because I knew exactly how much they would have to pay me when they finally figured it out. The first phone call from Dennis came at 9:50 in the evening. I let it ring. He called again 30 minutes later, and this time he left a voicemail. Hey Justin, it is Dennis, he said, trying to sound casual. Listen, we have hit a few minor snags here. Nothing major, just some hiccups with the back-end services. We were wondering if you might be available for a few hours of consulting work just to help with a quick migration. Give me a call. I did not call him back. A formal email from Dennis followed at 11:03 in the evening. The subject read quick assistance. He wrote that they were in a time-sensitive situation and would appreciate my expertise to get the team oriented. He added that they were happy to compensate me for my time, and that it would not be anything extensive. I read the email while brushing my teeth. Then the text messages started coming. Dennis wrote that clients were furious and that this situation did not look good for my professional reputation either. He added that they would make it worth my while. That message made me snort. At 12:45 in the morning, I finally replied. Hi Dennis, I wrote. I am currently available on a limited consulting basis. My rate is $650 per hour with a 100 hours minimum. A full upfront payment is required to reserve my time. I do not work under any non-disclosure agreements, non-competes, or any derivative confidentiality clauses. A detailed scope of work must be provided in writing before the first session. Please let me know if you would like me to send an invoice. He did not respond for 10 hours. At 8:15 the next morning, I woke up to a short text from him. Fine, we accept, it read. Please send the invoice and terms. Now they were ready to talk. I sent over a professional invoice with a subject line that read Consulting Services Agreement. I made sure to include an itemized breakdown. Line 1 was for emergency technical consulting and system restoration support. Line 2 was for strategic oversight of back-end stabilization, because Dennis loved strategy so much. Under the terms, I specified that payment was due within 24 hours. I also added a clause stating that the client waived all prior ownership claims to the codebase and that all work would be performed remotely on my own schedule. Finally, I required the client to publish a formal statement on LinkedIn, clarifying that the previous Code Monkey comments were inaccurate. Dennis initially balked at the LinkedIn requirement, calling it unprofessional, but I told him it was non-negotiable. With clients threatening to sue, he had no choice. Within 2 hours, the payment cleared in full. They had paid for 100 hours of work, even though I knew I could resolve the issue in under 5 hours. It was never about the time. It was about the proof. I walked through the glass doors of PulseGrid at 12:30 in the afternoon sharp, wearing jeans, boots, and a hoodie that read "I void warranties." I did not have an active employee security badge this time. Instead, I had to wait at the front desk like an outsider until reception printed a temporary visitor pass. I clipped it to my pocket like a small medal. The silence when I entered the development bullpen was thick and delicious. The usual hum of keyboards and chatter was gone, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. The offshore team stared at me as if I were a ghost from an old company legend, the one who had built the entire foundation they were currently trying to fix. Toby Miller looked up from his terminal, his face pale and exhausted. He let out a long breath of relief. "Oh, thank God," he whispered, rubbing his eyes. "I thought we were going to be stuck here all weekend." Chloe Thorne, our chief technology officer, came power-walking out of the main conference room, with 3 interns flanking her like emotional support assistants. "Justin, thank you for coming," she said, trying to sound confident, though the slight tremble in her voice gave her away immediately. "We have isolated the issue, but we cannot re-establish service continuity. We are hoping you can stabilize things for us." I could tell she had Googled a few technical terms last night, hoping to sound like she understood the architecture. I did not say anything. I simply dropped my laptop bag onto the conference table like a sheriff returning to town for a final showdown. "Point me to the terminal," I said calmly, pulling out my chair. It took me exactly 4 hours. I logged into my private validation server, deactivated the license restriction check, and updated the security tokens. Then I spun up the original containers, restored the database, synchronization points from my private mirror, and recompiled the service endpoints with the original keys that only I possessed. I had to write a script to reconcile over 12,000 missing transaction records that had accumulated in the temporary queues while the system was down. One by one, the services began to flicker green. The dashboards loaded, the clients logged back in, and the performance metrics returned to normal. The system breathed again, surfacing after being underwater for days. The offshore developers watched in complete silence, realizing that what they had spent 3 days trying to fix had been resolved in a few hours. At 12:15 in the morning, before logging off, I uploaded one single file to the company's internal knowledge base. It was a document titled Unnecessary Documentation, containing 120 pages of perfectly organized, clear, and easy-to-follow infrastructure notes. The very first page had a graphic of a Post-it note with my old Slack message printed across it. It read, "Do you want this documented, or are we still pretending this runs on magic?" I packed my laptop and walked out of the office. There was no farewell party or round of applause, just a quiet nod to Toby Miller, a quick wink to the QA lead, and silent stares from the managers. As I neared the elevator, I saw Dennis Croft. He was standing by the break room holding a cup of burned coffee, wearing a wrinkled shirt. His executive identification badge was gone, replaced by a standard staff pass. He had been demoted, and he looked like a man who had lost all his authority. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Justin," he said, his voice quiet. I tilted my head. Dennis, I replied. There was a long silence. I did not know, he muttered, looking down at his coffee. You did not read the contracts, I corrected. That was your problem. You were so focused on strategy that you forgot to read the foundation. He opened his mouth again, perhaps to apologize or to offer some corporate excuse, but I did not wait. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button. What I did not tell Dennis, and what no one at PulseGrid knew yet, was that exactly 50 minutes before I arrived that morning, I had signed a full-time employment agreement with Novahelix, their biggest competitor. The new role came with double the salary, significant equity, and complete technical autonomy. They had handed me the keys to a brand new cloud environment and told me to build the future of their platform. I was already 3 weeks into designing their new backend architecture. This time, there would be no licensing agreements or temporary arrangements. I would own the codebase completely from day one, and the equity they gave me meant I would share in the company's direct success. As the elevator doors closed, I pulled out my phone and checked the onboarding chat for Novahelix. One of the lead developers had sent me a message asking what our licensing structure for the new services would look like. I smiled and typed back a short reply. I wrote, "Ours." I knew that at my new company, my contributions would be respected and my ownership secure. I was no longer a code monkey in someone else's kingdom. I was building my own.